This next segment is designed to further introduce you to the t-table, which is the tabular expression of the t probability distribution. Just like the z-table in SPATS, the z-table was the tabular expression of the normal probability distribution. So we're going to be talking about the t-table, which is the tabular distribution of the t probability distribution. And so if you haven't already, go ahead and turn your page to page 388 in SPATS, or go ahead and print off so you have a copy of the t-table handy, because I just want to orient you to introduce you to a couple of things about this table. The first part of the table I want to orient you to is, I don't know why my hair's sticking out today, but it is, or what's left of it. The first thing I want to orient you to on this table is the middle portion of the table. And I'm taking some highlighter and I am drawing a rectangle. Hopefully that comes through on the video. I drew a rectangle around what I'm referring to as the middle portion. So you see what I mean when I say the middle portion? I drew a yellow rectangle, a highlighted rectangle around that. I want to talk about what that middle portion comprises of. Go ahead and pause this and draw a rectangle around your copy as well if you want. The middle portion of the t-table are referred to as t-scores. Those are t-scores. And hopefully, if you've already committed this to memory, you know that t-scores are units of standard error. All right? So that's the middle portion of that table, units of standard error. In fact, those units of standard error, or those amounts of standard error, are, and this is very important, so feel free to rewind this and watch it again and again. Those units of standard error are how much standard error we could expect to surround a mean given certain conditions. Those units of standard error, the middle of that the middle of this t probability distribution, the part I've placed the rectangle around, those are units of standard error, amounts of standard error. Those are amounts of standard error. In fact, they are how much standard error we could expect to occur by chance given certain conditions. What conditions are those? Well, we're going to talk about those conditions. But once again, those middle scores are t-scores. Those are units or amounts of standard error. They are how much standard error we could expect to occur by chance given certain conditions. Now, let's talk about what those conditions are. Those conditions are simply how large our sample is, and the task at hand, what we're supposed to be, what we're trying to do. Those are the two conditions. I'll say them again. How large our sample is, and our task, what we're supposed to be doing. So let's first talk about sample size. Sample size is represented on this table, but it's called something else. It's called degrees of freedom, or DF, which on the table can be found right there, DF. DF stands for degrees of freedom. Degrees of freedom is simply a proxy for sample size. And here's how you find degrees of freedom. There's a formula for it. The formula is n minus 1. That's the formula for degrees of freedom for the purposes of this current chapter, chapter 7. That's how you calculate degrees of freedom, n minus 1. You are going to be asked to choose the correct t-value from this table. Where are the t-values? Where are they? Do you remember? They're right here in the middle, in this yellowed rectangular section that I've marked off. Those are t-values. Those are amounts of standard error that we could expect to occur by chance. Those are amounts of standard error that we could expect to occur by chance given certain conditions. What conditions? The conditions are our sample size, or more specifically, degrees of freedom, and the task at hand. We'll get to the task at hand in a little bit. But the degrees of freedom, which can be found right here, starting with 1 and ending with infinity, the degrees of freedom can be found simply by taking sample size and subtracting 1. It is the degrees of freedom that will tell you which row your t-value is going to come from. It is the degrees of freedom that will tell you which row your t-value, the correct t-value, is going to come from. Okay? So for example, assume a sample size of 15, n equals 15, sample size of 15, n equals 15, what would your degrees of freedom be? N minus 1. 15 minus 1 is 14, therefore the correct t-value would come from the row labeled 14. Degrees of freedom, n minus 1. Assume, if you will, a sample size of 28. All right, a sample size of 28, so n equals 28. N minus 1, 28 minus 1 is 27. That means the correct t-value will come from that row labeled 27, right? Degrees of freedom, n minus 1. Assume a sample size of 10, n equals 10. 10 minus 1 is 9. That means the correct t-value will come from the row labeled 9. Degrees of freedom. So in order to choose or pick the correct t-value, you need to know two pieces of information: the degrees of freedom and the task at hand. Now, what about this task at hand? The task at hand can be found up here in the upper portion. If you're looking at your book, it's sort of the blue or gray shaded area. And for now, I want you to concentrate primarily, or if not solely, on the row or portion that's labeled or called confidence intervals. I've highlighted it here, confidence intervals, because the building of confidence intervals is what we're going to be doing quite a bit of over the coming several hours, days, and week, as the case may be. So that is the task at hand. And if you look at that portion that I've highlighted, the very top of the table, confidence intervals, two-tailed, confidence interval percents, two-tailed, you have several choices. 80% starting on the left, 90%, 95%, 98%, 99%, and 99.9%. Again, I've highlighted it. That's the task at hand. So, as a recap, this middle portion, the portion I've placed a yellow rectangle around, those are t-values. Those are units of standard error. More specifically, that's the amount of standard error you could expect to occur by chance alone, given certain conditions. What conditions are those? Your sample size, or more specifically, let's stop saying sample size and start saying degrees of freedom, DF, n minus 1 degrees of freedom. That's one piece of information you need to choose the correct t-value. And the other piece of information is the task at hand. And the task at hand for the coming future, the immediate future, will be the building of confidence intervals. And we will build confidence intervals that are of a certain width. In width, as in wide, and that width will be 80%, 90%, 95%, 98%, 99%, or 99.9%. The next segment is going to go a little bit further into choosing the correct t-value. You're going to have to do a lot of that, not just this week, but the next 2 weeks as well. You're going to have to do a lot of that. So please make sure that you have a good handle on the t-probability distribution, the tabular t-probability distribution, as well as how to choose the correct t-value.